Reports emerged on Saturday evening of a massive explosion that occurred at a commercial port in the southern Iranian city of Bandar Abbas on the southern coast of Iran. Authorities in Iran were quick to rule it as an accident, acknowledging that the explosion was linked to a shipment of chemicals which are needed to produce the fuel for ballistic missiles. This shipment of chemicals came from China, but instead of being used to produce fuel for missiles to fire against Israel, these chemicals have caused an explosion which did massive damage to Iran, with at least 5 fatalities and around 700 wounded. Iran's president has ordered an investigation of the explosion, which Israel's government has said it had no connection to. However, Israel is aware that Iran's leaders will be tempted to blame us anyway, and so the IDF has been put on high alert and is closely monitoring the situation for any signs that Iran will lash out. For now, Iranian authorities seem focused on putting out the enormous fires that have broken out at the port, evacuating civilians, and containing the damage as best they can. This comes just as a new round of nuclear talks between the United States and Iran started on Saturday in Oman, focusing on expert meetings and aiming to draft a framework for a possible agreement. TBN Israel senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will bring us an in-depth look at these talks and what they mean for Israel moving forward. And elsewhere, the IDF has confirmed that they have eliminated Hussein Azat Muhammad Attawi, a terrorist linked to Hamas in Lebanon. And in Gaza, Hamas is losing its grip on the population, but it's much worse for them than that. According to sources in Lebanon, Hamas's regional collapse is underway, and the organization is losing footholds in Jordan, Syria, and even in Lebanon. But back to Gaza, where there have been heavy exchanges of fire between the IDF and Hamas over the past 24 hours, as well as airstrikes on 2 buildings in Gaza City and Jabalia that were defined as command and control compounds for the terrorist group. Meanwhile, the IDF issued a warning to residents of Bet Hanun and Sheikh Zayed to evacuate the area. Hundreds of terrorists have been eliminated and more than 1,800 terror targets have been struck. The IDF is preparing to increase pressure on Hamas and clarifies, "We will do our best to ensure aid does not reach Hamas." 3 divisions are operating in the Gaza Strip, including 2 in the Rafah area. All of this has come at a cost, as the Air Force had to assist a unit to extract itself from a fierce engagement, and a tank driver was fatally hit by a sniper of Hamas. However, despite the hardships and the losses, IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir intends to increase the pressure measures on the Gaza Strip and on Hamas through an operation that included and will include air fire and ground maneuver towards new focal points. The purpose of this new plan is to increase the pressure on Hamas to return the hostages and possibly drive Hamas from power for good. We'll also have details for you of how advanced artificial intelligence systems developed by the IDF are becoming a decisive weapon in combat. From eliminating senior Hamas figures to locating hostages, IDF technologies are changing the rules of the game. So all of this is putting enormous pressure on Hamas, and for the first time, they're admitting that it's starting to work. And according to reports, a Hamas negotiation delegation arrived in Cairo over the weekend to discuss with the mediators the new proposal raised this week after Hamas rejected a previous Israeli proposal. Now, Hamas officials in Cairo are saying that we are ready for a 5-year ceasefire in exchange for all of the hostages. And back in Israel, sirens sounded in Beersheba, the southern Israeli city, and the surrounding area on Saturday morning as the IDF announced that a missile launched from Yemen was intercepted before it crossed into Israel. We'll also have a report on all the action in Yemen itself, including the limited success that the Houthis have had in shooting down advanced American UAVs, drones. A Pentagon source admitted that the more the strike increased, the greater the risk to the aircraft. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on day 569 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region who are acting under the demands and the control of Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. But a moment before we begin, I want to invite you to please click on the subscribe button so that you remain tuned to what is happening in Israel and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. A powerful explosion occurred on Saturday evening at the Shahid Rajia port in the city of Bandar Abbas in southern Iran. According to initial reports, there were at least 5 fatalities and around 700 people were also injured in this incident. The number of fatalities will likely grow in the coming days as injured people succumb to their wounds. The Tasnim news agency, which is affiliated with the regime in Iran, reported a chaotic situation at the port. A statement by the agency added that most of the buildings in the port were damaged as a result of the explosion. Security and rescue forces are trying to gain control of the situation, but for now, operations at Rajai port have been suspended. Iranian television also reported that the blast was caused by a fire in a warehouse that contained flammable materials in the Bandar Abbas customs, and the semi-official Maher news agency reported secondary explosions continued long after the initial blast, indicating that explosives and flammable chemicals stored at the site were cooking off amidst the intense heat from the fires. And several hours after the initial reports started to come in, the fires were still out of control, spreading to other parts of the port and causing additional explosions and additional damage. There were other reports that fire broke out in other parts of the port before the large explosion started, and for now, officials are not specifying which containers exploded first, what they were being used to store, or any other details. However, I can tell you some details, including the fact that according to various reports, part of the area affected at the port is also used by the Revolutionary Guards Navy. Also, in recent months, the same port received 2 Chinese ships that were said to be carrying the chemical sodium perchlorate, a substance that, according to world reports, is central component in the rocket fuel for Iran's ballistic missiles. According to a CNN report, these shipments were ordered by the procurement department of the Self-Sufficiency Jihad Organization, SSJO, one of the bodies responsible for developing Iran's ballistic missiles. The same reports included that there aren't many things that the chemical could be used for other than rocket fuel. It was a pretty narrow range of uses. Large quantities of these materials have been delivered to this port in recent months. It would be necessary for producing solid fuel for, amongst others, the Kibar-Shikhan and the Haj Qasem missiles. The Kibar-Shikhan can reach a range of about 1,450 kilometers, while the Haj Qasem reaches about 1,400 kilometers. The Iranians launched several Kibar-Shikhan missiles at Israel in the first attack in April 2024, and in the second attack in October 2024, remnants of at least 1 Kibar-Shikhan were identified in Israel. Sodium perchlorate is a strong oxidizer salt considered vital in producing solid oil thanks to its stability and its ability to release oxygen at a high rate. These properties allow rapid launch and long-term storage of missiles, which makes the substance especially sensitive and internationally monitored because of concerns over military uses. It should be noted that in 2020, a cyber attack attributed to Israel was carried out against Bandar Abbas port, paralyzing its facilities for several days, and the Shahid Rajai port lies about 15 kilometers south of Bandar Abbas on the northern shore of the Strait of Hormuz at the entrance to the Persian Gulf. For obvious reason, it is a strategically important strait through which 20% of the global oil traffic passes. For this reason, it is a very important economic port for Iran, and it is the country's largest commercial port, handling 70% of Iran's goods, critically including food imports, adding up to around 80 million tons each year. It also has oil and petrochemical facilities. And once again, it is still not clear whether the explosion was caused by some malfunction or by sabotage, but it is evident that its source is an extremely explosive material. This brings back memories of the massive blast that destroyed Beirut's port in August 2020, causing 218 fatalities and injuring over 7,000 people. That blast was later claimed to have resulted from the ignition of flammable materials that Hezbollah stored there. However, Iran's ambassador to Lebanon, Mujtaba Imani, hurried at noon to deny any similarities between the explosion in Iran and the Beirut port explosion, saying this event is much smaller in scope than the Beirut port explosion and they cannot be compared. I know what you're thinking. I was thinking the same thing when I saw the first reports about all this, but so far, Israeli government officials are declining to comment, and the IDF is saying that it was not involved in this situation. So a senior military source asked whether Israel is changing its alert level following the event replied, "We are in a period in which the region is being reshaped. We are prepared in defense and readiness for any development." Beyond any doubt, this is occurring at a critical moment as diplomats from Iran and the United States are meeting in Oman on Saturday morning for a third round of nuclear talks. So TBN Israel senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will fill us in on all the details later, but for now, we will move on to the Gaza Strip. And a moment before we go to the latest reports, I want to ask you to keep helping us seek and share the truth by visiting our YouTube channel, going to our social media networks of TBN Israel, Yair Pinto, or Mati Shoshani, and clicking that subscribe button. And the most important thing that you can do is pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And in the last 24 hours, the IDF ramped up the pressure on Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad organizations in Gaza. In less than a day, Air Force jets struck two buildings, one in the Jaffa neighborhood of Gaza City and the second this morning in Jabalia. And according to estimates, several dozen terrorists were hit in the two strikes. The IDF says that the targets struck are command and control compounds that the terrorists used to plan and execute terrorist activities against the Israeli civilians and against the IDF forces. So heavy exchanges of fire also took place on Friday from the afternoon hours in several sectors of the Gaza Strip. In the fighting, a reserve soldier from Battalion 5250, Iron Fist Brigade 205, was seriously wounded. He was evacuated for medical treatment to Soroka Hospital in Beersheba in Israel, and his family was informed. In another incident, two additional soldiers were wounded to a lesser extent, but during the incidents, the Air Force was scrambled to assist in evacuating the casualties while carrying out umbrella strikes to support the ground forces. In addition, a border police undercover unit was ambushed in Sajaiya while the IDF was working to expand the buffer zone that serves as the security strip on the Gazan side of the border. A fighter from the Special Police Unit was mortally wounded in the exchange of fire, and during the subsequent operations, a tank was hit, resulting in one fatality amongst the crew, while 3 other soldiers were wounded. This is all happening as the IDF's activities in the Gaza Strip is advancing in more populated areas, leading to a higher likelihood of encounters with armed terrorists, such as what led to these casualties. However, in addition to these ground maneuvers, the IDF says that since the day before yesterday, 120 Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip have been struck from the air, including weapons depots in the northern strip and targets in Rafah. Altogether, 1,800 targets have been struck in the Gaza Strip in the past month since the fighting resumed. The IDF is preparing to increase the pressure and tighten the noose on Hamas's new areas that will be gradually seized by the troops. And regarding the political echelon's demand that the IDF ensure that humanitarian aid entering the Gaza Strip does not reach Hamas's hands, the army said, "We are discussing several alternatives on the matter, and we will do our best to keep aid from reaching Hamas." Now, let me tell you about some of the IDF's units operating inside the Gaza Strip. In the northern part of Gaza, Division 252 continues its operations, and over the past 48 hours, aircraft struck an Islamic Jihad weapons depot in the Darj Tufa neighborhood. Division 143, the Gaza Division, is operating in the Sabora and the Tel Sultan areas of Rafah in the south. And in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, Division 36 is operating in the Rafah area and along the Morag corridor, while the IDF and the Air Force continues to provide fire support to the maneuvering forces. And amidst all of this kinetic activity on the ground, Hamas delegation arrived in Cairo on Saturday for more talks with the Egyptian mediators. And upon its arrival in Egypt at noon, a Hamas statement announced the composition of the delegation, which includes very senior figures in the organization, and again declared that the terror organization's proposal stands with a 5-year ceasefire in exchange for all the remaining hostages to be released. Hamas then stated that it would not accept a partial ceasefire agreement and called for a comprehensive agreement that would end the war. A well-informed Hamas source told the pro-Saudi newspaper Ashraq al-Awsat this week that the proposal to be discussed in Cairo includes 5 clauses and within it a comprehensive deal and a long truce of up to 5 years with a demand for regional and international guarantees. This follows a visit to the Gaza Strip last Thursday by the IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, who said, "If we do not see progress in returning the hostages, we will expand our activity to an even more intense and significant operation until we reach a decision. We continue the operational pressure and tighten the ring on Hamas as required. Hamas is responsible for starting this war. It currently cruelly holds the hostages, and it is responsible for the civilian population's dire situation in Gaza. Hamas is mistaken about our capabilities, our intentions, and the determination that we have, just like Nasrallah and his command group." And meanwhile, the Security Cabinet convened on Thursday to discuss expanding the operation in the Gaza Strip, and a source familiar with the Cabinet's proceedings said that ministers came to the meeting demanding that the Cabinet approves plans for continuing the fighting and expanding the operation in the Gaza Strip without dragging out time. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development, and we ask you to keep spreading the truth by sharing our videos on YouTube and following us on social media. I also want to talk to you about one more way that you can help us here in Israel and also can get something for yourself. So with everything that's happening right now in Israel and the Middle East, many people are feeling unsure and even afraid. And in times like these, we remember the power of prayer and the symbols that God gave us to remember that He's close by, always. That's why we want to share with you our partner, Bible Healing Oil. It's made with olive oil and other materials that were used in biblical times. Today, people still use these oils to pray, to anoint, and to feel God's presence in their home and in their heart. Right now, you can get 20% off your first order with the code TBNIL. And if you spend over $99, you'll also get a free bottle of the Oil of Elijah, a special blend that's all about faith and strength. You'll also become part of the Gold Eagle Club, where you'll get buy one, get one free for life and other great benefits. So just go to tbn.org/Bible Healing Oil to order. That's tbn.org/Bible Healing Oil. In these times, let's stay strong in faith and remember that God is with us and He is in control. Now, we'll hear from TBN Israel senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani, who will take us through the latest developments in our neighborhood, the Middle East. Mati, what happened in the third round of talks between the United States and Iran?
So, over the weekend, round number 3 of the US-Iran, mediated by Oman, round of discussions comes to an end. This round was supposed to be, as a reminder, a more professional and technical discussion versus just a big picture or top-down discussion. The main topics of controversy, the main topics of disagreement between the US and the Iranians remain on the table. What are they? The level of enrichment that the Iranians can reach with uranium, weapons manufacturing and missile manufacturing, and of course, financial sanctions, which are the huge financial elephant in the room. After many days and many tweets and many discussions and negotiations, both publicly and privately, we're still at an impasse. In fact, the foreign minister for the Iranians, Abbas Araghchi, says at the end of Saturday's negotiations, he says, look, there are some very large topics that we're not able to agree on, and they're fundamental to this agreement, but they remain hopeful in a way. And the Americans, the team is by the way led by Witkoff, the Americans walk out of this agreement with the same, or this negotiation with the same statement. Look, we want to reach an agreement, we're making progress, but it doesn't seem like it's moving in the right direction. And hovering above all of this is President Trump. President Trump over the weekend gives sort of a deadline. He says, look, you have about 60 days to reach an agreement, and if not, then we're going to military option. And that's where Israel wants to be. We want to be in a place where military option is the option on the table. In fact, Prime Minister Netanyahu and our government have said repeatedly in recent weeks the following thing: we want the Libyan model or a military option, nothing in between. What's the Libyan model? The Libyan model says the following: no nuclear capabilities whatsoever, no enriched uranium that doesn't come from an outside source, no nuclear facilities whatsoever, and that's it. And if you have any of that, we want the military option. But that's not at all being discussed right now between Iran and the US. Iran and the US are discussing details that are far removed from what Israel is requesting. In fact, they're actually far removed from what the US was originally requesting. And here's where it gets interesting. The Iranians in this whole discussion, they've learned their lesson from previous negotiation rounds with the US. And they're saying, okay, we're willing to negotiate and we're willing to enter this agreement, but if you, the US, violate the agreement, we want a snapback option where you are penalized for violating the agreement, which, by the way, the US did in the past. And the US is looking at this from another perspective, saying to the Iranians, if you do anything to violate this agreement, even one clause, then there's an immediate punishment, financially speaking, on you. Sanctions are back, fiscal, financial punishments are back on the table. So it's a really different negotiation. Israel's asking for one thing, and the Iranians and the Americans have quite a large distance in between them. And looming above all of this is the fact that there still is a very large contingency of American military presence in this region. Not only that, while this is all happening, Israel continues to train its Air Force. Our Air Force has been training for long-range bombing missions, read between the lines of that, to attack the Iranian nuclear facilities on our own. A week ago, we started reporting on the fact that Israel is possibly at a point where it might have to go against the will of the US in attacking the Iranians. And that's a whole different story that we don't have time to cover today, but it's a really interesting place to be in. Here's another small anecdote. The US is demanding that the Iranians dismantle their missile program. The Iranians are saying no go for that discussion altogether. They don't even want even to talk about that option. And at the same time, we just saw a huge explosion in one of their ports, which was for chemical components for rocket fuel. So the Iranians, while we're having these negotiations, are going full speed at expanding, enlarging, and scaling up their ability to launch and manufacture rockets. So we're in this really odd place right now. The Iranians are asking for one thing, the Americans are asking for something entirely different, and Israel is, sort of almost removed from this conversation in the sense that we want something entirely different than what they do. And all of this leads us to the question of where is all of this going? I think you can guess and I can guess that in 60 days there will be no agreement. There will be maybe a quasi-agreement, maybe a half agreement, but an agreement that actually addresses the situation of whether or not the Iranians have nuclear capabilities is not going to happen. The Iranian government is repeatedly saying to its people, we've won this round of negotiations. we will have a nuclear program, we will have strength and power in the Middle East, and we will be back on track to regain financial ability and remove the sanctions. And this is sort of where the Iranians are going with all of this. The Iranian government has been hit very, very hard repeatedly for months and years at this point by financial sanctions. If you look at the trend, sort of the chart of the Iranian real compared to the US dollar, it is insane. I mean, they peg their exchange rate at like 40-something thousand, I think it's 42,000 real to the US dollar. But if you look at what it's actually being traded at, it's more than 10 times higher, and it can fluctuate 30-40% within a week. So the Iranian economy suffered greatly. There's a huge amount of inflation within the Iranian economy, and because of that, they are desperate to get to an agreement, but not desperate enough to give up what they call their ace in their hand, which is the nuclear program. This all leaves us at a bit of an impasse. The Iranians are going to try to weasel their way into an agreement that doesn't include actually dismantling their nuclear program. And the Americans are going to try to prevent them from doing that. And Israel all the while is sort of this hawk watching from above, waiting to see if now is the time where we need to make an attack. And I want to remind you, this is the time to make an attack. The Iranians are weakened. They've lost sort of their intimidation through Hezbollah and through other proxies against Israel and against US forces in this area. The American forces in this region have been bombing the Houthi targets in northern Yemen at an incessant rate for days now. And now is the time for military action, if ever there was a time for that. And that's what Israel is calling for. And I personally believe that's the only right way to go about this. The Iranians have proven time and time again for years now that they will never give up their nuclear program. And unless someone's planning to invade the country of Iran and dismantle all their military facilities, and I don't see that happening anytime soon, a military strike is the way to go about this. And then when you factor in the Iranian financial pressures, the fact that their currency is devalued at an insane rate, the fact that they are hurting badly because of the sanctions, we understand they're going to try to push for an agreement and at the same time hold on to what's left of their nuclear capabilities. Anyway, make sure to keep up with everything that we report on this topic because things are moving at a rapid pace. And now back to Yair Pinto.
Thank you, Mati. Now things are clear regarding Iran's intentions. Here at TBN Israel, we will keep reporting on every development and we will keep sharing what's happening in Israel so you will know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And we invite you to stay tuned to the truth in real time and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Now we switch our focus back to Israel's home front, because on Saturday morning, the incoming missile alert sirens sent millions of Israelis running to their bomb shelters as the Houthis in Yemen fired yet another ballistic missile at us. This time, the target was the city of Beersheba, but as always, the incoming missile was successfully intercepted outside the Israeli airspace. And speaking of the Houthis, the United States military continues to strike Houthi targets in Yemen as part of the military operation announced by President Donald Trump last month. Dozens of the terror group's targets have been destroyed in this air campaign, and a senior American official claimed that the Houthis have been significantly weakened. Nevertheless, the American strikes are not going unanswered, and according to the report on Friday on the Saudi-owned El Arabiya news portal, the rebels have managed in recent weeks to shoot down 7 advanced MQ-9 Reaper drones, each of which cost the Pentagon $30 million. And according to officials in Washington's defense establishment, 3 aircrafts were downed just in the past week, indicating Houthi improvement and progress. And another Defense Department official said that the rise in the number of strikes could endanger the aircrafts, and that the United States is taking every possible measure to protect its equipment and its interests in the region. And speaking of which, the United States Central Command released rare footage showing an EA-18G Growler electronic warfare jet taking off from an aircraft carrier for strikes against the Houthis in Yemen, carrying AGM-88E missiles intended mainly to destroy radars and air defensive systems. In the footage distributed by CENTCOM, the aircraft can be seen carrying 4 AGM-88E Haram missiles or an older model of the familiar missile, whereas they were usually documented carrying only 2 such missiles per mission. Their primary role is in electronic warfare and intelligence. So the big question, of course, is what the missile's targets are. The Houthis have an air defensive array based on old Russian systems and radars and anti-aircraft missiles that they received from the Iranians. These systems have shot down several American UAVs, and the missiles may be intended to stop that trend. Meanwhile, CENTCOM spokesman Dave Estabon said that in the last few days, the air campaign has struck more than 800 Houthi targets, adding that these strikes destroyed command and control facilities, air defense systems, advanced weapon production facilities, weapon storage sites, and also eliminated senior Houthis. So here, at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development in the campaign against the Houthis, and once again, we ask you to keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. I want to conclude today's report by paying respects to some heroes who gave their lives to defend the state of Israel in the last few days. Staff Sergeant Neta Yitzhak Kahana and Armored Corps Officer Captain Ido Wallach fell in the Gaza Strip on Friday in an encounter with terrorists in the Sajaya neighborhood in the eastern Gaza city. Wallach, 21 from Jerusalem, was a platoon commander in Battalion 46 of the Iron Fist Brigade 401, and Kahana, 19 from Moshav Eitan, served as an undercover agent in the Border Police Unit of the South. The force in the area was engaged in expanding the buffer zone, which serves as a security strip on the Gaza side of the border. And during Friday's daylight hours preceding the encounter, reservists of Brigade 16 conducted searches in the eastern part of the neighborhood overlooking the western Negev and destroyed terrorist buildings and infrastructure. At 4:40, there was an exchange of fire and Eitan was hit. Evacuating the casualties from the densely built-up area took about 2 hours and included 5 engagements with terrorists who opened light arms and anti-tank fire at the troops. At 4:45, an anti-tank fighter from the rescue force was moderately wounded, and 40 minutes later additional RPGs were fired at tanks that were taking part in the rescue mission. Wallach's tank was hit by RPG fire at approximately 5:39, mortally wounding him and wounding 3 other members of the crew. So let's pray together for the well-being of the living soldiers, those that got wounded, and let's send warm support and love to the families who lost their loved ones. Let's keep praying for the Jewish state, for Israel. Let's pray for our hostages that are held in the Gaza Strip in the hands of Hamas terrorists. Let's pray for the defense of all the IDF soldiers and our allies if they're fighting in Gaza, in Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon, or in Judea and Samaria. Let's pray for all the civilians that are involved in this conflict. If it's the Iranian people in Iran, if it's the Gazan population in Gaza, if it's the people in Lebanon, in Syria, anyone who's not a terrorist and is under their control. Let's pray for their release from this grip. And most importantly, let's unite in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem.